So this week's text is coming to us. Oh, and if you guys could throw on mute, that would be great. This week's text that we're taking a look at is, you have it posted in the chat if you'd like to see it. Otherwise, I'll throw it up on the screen right now. And so this week's Torah portion is Tzav, which literally is the Hebrew word command. And Tzav is this funky parsha, again, which is the book of Leviticus, the second parsha. It's a challenging one for many people because it very much deals with the offerings. There are about 7 different offerings that the text goes through, and how the offering was to be given, how much of it was to be burned, what part of it is burned, what the purpose of the offering is, and then there's actually, at the end of that, there's an entire specific one-time only consecration orientation ceremony for Aaron and his sons at the tent of meeting, at the altar. And so this is like very old school esoteric, only applied really in the time of the wandering in the desert and or the time of the existence of the temple at Jerusalem. So again, if you wanted to be practical and you wanted to ask the question, how do we do the service in the temple? This text is great for you. If you're not at all interested about dead ancient rites that haven't been in practice for almost 2,000 years, this one's not so good for you. But that's where Hasidut is so great, because Hasidut is interested in how taking a text which is immutable and permanent and divine and from God is supposed to be for all time's sake, right? So how do we make it personal? How do we make it about ourselves? So the text says, the only line we're going to be doing this week, as is our custom, is this. Tzav et Aharon ve'et banav lemor, zot Torat ha'olah hi, ha'olah al mokdah, al hamizbeach, kol halayla, ad haboker, ve'esh hamizbeach tukad bo. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff here, but we're really only going to be focusing on a couple words, and then we're going to go all over the place into some other texts. This is either one that you're going to love because it's super weird and esoteric and is a tour of lots of other Jewish texts because it cross-references a bunch of other stuff, or you're going to hate because it's super weird and random and hard to kind of focus on. So the English translation is this. Command Aaron and his sons thus. This is the ritual, Zot HaTorah. The word is translated as a ritual, but we're never going to see it again as ritual. Zot HaTorah, this is the ritual of the burnt offering, the olah. And in Hebrew, olah just means the offering that goes up. You could also translate this as the ascending offering or the elevated offering. We usually see the olah as the burnt offering, but each of the offerings has its own specific set of rules. This one, it's called the olah because it goes up in flame. The burnt offering, ha'olah, itself shall remain mokedah, al hamizbeach kol halayla, shall where it is burned upon the altar all night until the morning, while the fire on the altar is kept going on it. And the text will continue to go on and say that the fire needed to be continually burned, that basically the priest's responsibility for the olah offering was to go get more coals or to go get more firewood all throughout the night and keep the fire burning. And then later on we get a reference to that, and it talks about what's called Eish Tamid, a permanent fire. That the altar at the temple had to have a roaring fire 24/7, 365. So there were Kohanim, there were priests whose sole responsibility was to keep the fires burning. And also one of the responsibilities of not only the priest, but the high priest himself was to go into the altar and remove the ashes of the olah every morning. So one interesting commentary off of that is you get messy and schmutzy when you deal with ash, and that's to keep the Kohen Gadol humble, so that he knew that, like, even though he's the most important spiritual religious figure in all of Judaism, he's also responsible for doing the yucky, schmutzy, cleaning out the ovens responsibility that none of us like doing. So a nice side text. All right. So we're going to be looking at our favorite text, which is a compendium that is called Itorei Torah. This is the book. I don't always use it, but it's my favorite. And we're looking at one text from in here. And this one text is from the Baal Shem Tov himself. So the Baal Shem Tov, or at least it's reported in his name. The Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, as you'll see down here. Oh, no, it doesn't say that. Oh, yeah, it does. Right here. Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer of Medjugorje, who died in 1760. I've taken to no longer recording the birth dates of most of these rabbis because most of them are fake anyways. For the Baal Shem Tov, it's an approximation by 5 years in either direction. You can do that. You want to work on that? You finished it? Edda's coloring her Haggadah. She wants to know what to do next. You can take a break, sweetie, and go watch something. Okay. All right. She's working her way through this Haggadah. It's doing great. Anyways, so we get a story about the Baal Shem Tov. So 2 kinds of texts about the Baal Shem Tov. One are magical stories where he works amazing fantasy magic, and others where he's teaching deep Torah. And this is the latter. So it says, Maaseh al Babesht shehalach al Mekor Vav lebeit HaMidrash. This is the Torah of the Olah, is the opening line that we're riffing on. So again, was originally written as ritual of the burnt offering. But here we're saying this is the Torah of the Olah instead, because he's gonna be punning on both of those words. The Olah shall remain burning. He's gonna pun off of that too, that the Olah has to remain on the altar on fire all evening until the morning. So a story of the Baal Shem Tov, that he was traveling with his entourage to the house of study. When he arrived at the door, he stood there and said, "We cannot go into this study hall. It is completely packed and filled with Torah without any remaining space." His escorts were puzzled. What does this mean? The Baal Shem Tov explained, it is written, this is the Torah which ascends, right? Zot Torah Ta'olah. What kind of Torah ascends and flourishes above? That which goes up and remains burning. That which is mokdah, right? That Olah mokdah is what the next thing says. Torah that is learned with fiery enthusiasm and in sacred fire. The word he uses for fiery enthusiasm is my creative translation. It's the Hebrew word lehit labhot, I think. Lehit lahabot. And lahav is a flame, and lehit lahav is to be enthusiastic in modern Hebrew. So when you make something lehit in Hebrew, it's hit pa'el, it becomes reflexive. So like prayer is lehit palel, to examine oneself or to pray to oneself would be how you translate it. This is the verb to flame and to flame oneself. So that's why I use the word fiery enthusiasm. He gets himself inflamed with excitement, or Torah that is learned with fiery excitement. So then he's going to quote something super weird, which is, he calls it tikkunim, but tikkunim is a shorthand for another text that we're going to look at in a sec. And that text is Tikkunei Zohar. So if you know the word Zohar, we'll come back to it in a second. But this is one of 10 volumes of the Zohar. In Tikkunei Zohar, it is written in Aramaic, Torah that is not learned with fear and love will not flourish above. Okay, so now we're getting into some funky stuff. So he continues and says, Torah of this kind, in which the learners in the house of study are engaged, it stays within the walls, and the air becomes compressed by too much Torah. So this is the Baal Shem Tov's kind of big finish. He kind of leaves it this is very Marilyn, I think. So Marilyn, hang on to this idea. He leaves a kind of a cliffhanger, and I think he leaves it in a binary place where it could mean one of two things, which we'll come back to, but we have to plow forward because he's reference the Zohar without explaining it very well. And so we're going to dive deep into that. But here he's talking about how Torah needs to be learned with great enthusiasm. And what kind of proper enthusiasm does one need to have? Fear and love. And then he goes on and he says, the people in this Beit Midrash, it's too packed. And so we can't go in, which means one of two things. We can't go in because it's too packed with people who are doing too much fiery enthusiasm of fear and love. And there's no room for any more fire and enthusiasm and fear and love, right? You know, the room is packed and we can't join in. It's reached critical mass. Or some sort of opposite, which is that this is a room full of people praying with the wrong intention, and it's packed, but their prayers are not going up, right? The room is closed and the prayers are stuck, which calls to mind another story, which is also attributed to the Baal Shem Tov that you may have heard from a rabbi at High Holidays, because all the rabbis tell this story at some point during High Holidays. I think I've told this story about 6 times in my career already, just at High Holidays, which is, there's a famous story about people praying and people praying and people praying, and then a boy comes in and blows a flute. And everyone gets mad at the boy because, you know, he shouldn't be distracting everyone from prayer. And the rabbi says, no, the prayers in the room were all stuck and none of them would go up. But when the boy blew his flute, it blew the roof off the metaphysical ceiling, and the prayers were allowed to ascend to Hashem. So this idea that your prayers all get stuck in the room. So there's that story is attributed also to the Baal Shem Tov. And this story is attributed to the Baal Shem Tov, where he won't even go into the room because all the prayers are stuck in the room. And for somehow he references this weird line in Tikkunei Zohar. So I did a deep dive and I did something I've never done in my entire career before, which is I pulled out the Zohar. I have pulled out the Zohar before because I took a class in it in rabbinical school. So I pulled out the Zohar, which is all in Aramaic. It's a 13th century mystical work, which is completely bizarre and almost impossible to understand. And I studied it. This is not the first time I've ever tried to study Zohar on my own, but usually I fail and give up. That's where I'm at. And actually I figured out what it meant and I brought it to you today. So either this is going to be the most amazing class you've ever had, because you're getting raw, unfiltered Zohar as it's being referenced by the Baal Shem Tov, or you're going to be like, I don't understand what the hell's going on. Rabbi Goodman is off his rocker. I'll check in next week and see if he can make more sense, right? I have not had anything to drink today. Don't worry. So anyways, that's Tikkunei Zohar. 2 quick backgroundy things on the Zohar. Number 1, the Zohar is the mystical work that is attributed to Moses de Leon. But he says he didn't actually write it, that he only found a manuscript that belonged to Shimon Bar Yochai, which is why on my edition of the Zohar, there's a picture of Mount Meron, which is where Shimon Bar Yochai his grave is. And on Lag BaOmer, there's a big party there because Lag BaOmer has become the mystical holiday of Shimon Bar Yochai. The second piece that I'll say about the Zohar is the Zohar is generally believed, maybe if you know only one thing about the Zohar, you know this semi-apocryphal story, which is that Zohar is only permitted to people to study for people who are male, 40, have kids, and are married, and have studied the entire Talmud. Okay, I checked 5. I checked 4 out of the 5 boxes. I have not studied the entire Talmud. I'm working my way through. I say I'm like maybe 8% done. So 92% to go. But the Hasidim really did not believe any of that, which is why the Baal Shem Tov quotes Tikkunei Zohar here. He's giving his followers access to mystical wisdom that they were not supposed to be able to have access to, which is all one of my favorite lines that you've heard in this class multiple times. Hasidut is for the people. Right? Hasidut is the democratization of text. Nothing is too esoteric. Nothing is too intellectual. Everyone should have access to all the cool stuff. All right. With that, we're going to move a little bit forward. But let's take a pause real quick to make sure to check for understanding. Is everyone somewhat on board with what I'm talking about? Or is anybody here totally and completely mystified? Rich has his hand up. Go ahead, Rich. I think I came out of share screen. So yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, so there's a bit of an inconsistency with the democratization versus the room that's full and you can't get in, although maybe I'm misreading. Maybe you can get in even though it's full anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. My read of it is the Hasidim, his entourage want to go into the house of study, and he says we can't go in; it's too full. And it's an interesting question as to whether he means it's too full and there's too much holiness, and we can't add to the holiness, like all the holiness is being occupied, or whether he's saying it's not holy because it's too full, which is, for us who are all in isolation, is a kind of ironic text, right? None of us can go into any spaces with any group of people because of the coronavirus. Paula has a question. Go ahead, Paula.
Yes, just where it says it's compressed with too much Torah. How can you ever have too much Torah in any form?
Yeah, it's a very weird. Yeah, I love that statement, and I had the same problem when I looked at it. I was like, this is weird. I've never seen any text like this.
Yeah, there's no such thing as too much.
Right.
Too much study. There is never too much study.
No, I'm with you. And I found the whole thing very strange. I looked up, there were words that I had to look up. I didn't know the word Gadush. And Gadush is the Hebrew word for packed. And then he says, B'Torah Melo'ah HaChalal. That there is no space to the room, which it's very odd to say there's no space for Torah, like as if Torah was a tangible physical thing. But he throws it out that way. Dan wanted to say something, then Marilyn, go ahead. And turn on your mic, dude.
Okay. What I find fascinating about the different points of view, it's sort of when the Supreme Court comes out with a decision or people are talking about it, they go back to, in this case, like from 1842 or different things like that. Everybody has a different opinion of how you interpret it. That's what this is comparable to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I think that's important about the way I framed the text is I could be reading it wrong, that it goes in two directions. That there may be a clear intent, but I don't see it. I don't know whether the clear intent of the writer of this text was to say there is a possibility that a room can be spiritually incapable of any more prayer and study, or whether this was kind of a wonky like oddity. Marilyn and then Paula.
I just wanted to say two quick things. And one is that when you were first going over the verse, it never occurred to me that it could have too much fiery prayer, that it could be too filled with people whose prayers were not rising above like the smoke from the offering going up, and which immediately made me flash on as above, so below, which depending again how you look at that particular comment, are you talking about the microcosm and the macrocosm? Are you talking about the way the interconnection, the reflection of one back to the other? And I when you were suggesting that there was too much intense prayer, I was just thinking no. And you know, when you started to talk about my original response to it, I said, gee, this is one of those things that makes perfect sense to me, and I totally love it. Nice.
All right, go ahead, Paula.
I'm just thinking maybe that you have studied so much, or there's one particular thing you've looked at that's so overwhelming to you that it's not really too much, but you need to stop and pause and take a breath and internalize or think about what you've studied and then go on, that it's too much, that thought is overwhelming at the moment.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to the counterpoint of, this is related to what Audrey said at the beginning, it's related to what Dan said at the end of his comments. Audrey kind of, you know, commenting on going in and having the focus of being kind of like having a cleansing, a reset for prayer, that's your focal point. And Dan saying like, it's rote for me, that I roll in and I let it kind of wash over me and it hits me as it hits me. That it's an interesting thing to then ask the question, what should, you know, because the rabbis are they pray a lot. And so they begin to think that prayer and study need to have mental intention before you go in. There's a whole set of kavanas before prayers that have been inserted into all prayer. And if you have a certain kind of Haggadah coming up for Passover, there are those kind of intentions even before some of the blessings, where you're supposed to kind of read this thing, which is a Kabbalistic intent or just a rote intent of like, here's where my head should be while I say this prayer, because the focus that I have in saying the prayer is really important. So with that, we're going to go forward and take a look at the text again. And you're going to need I'm going to give you a basic text, and then I'm going to give you an advanced text to help understand what the Baal Shem Tov is talking about when he quotes the Zohar. So the basic text is one that a lot of you who pray regularly, or even who pray irregularly, like a couple times a year, you may know this one. So when we sing Ahavah Rabbah, the second prayer that is the one that immediately precedes Shema and Ve'ahavta in the morning prayers every day, at some point about halfway into Ahavah, we switch tunes in the conservative movement, and we sing Ve'ha'erinenu b'toratecha b'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha ve'yached levavenu le'ahava u'yira et shemecha. So slow it down so that you could have the intent, right? And we're going to be looking at this. So the Rabbi Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael, he quotes the Zohar, and he says, Torah she'ein lomdim ota b'dechilu u'rechimu lo pircha la'ila, right? And what that translates as is Torah that is not learned with dechilu u'rechimu, fear and love, will not flourish above. And that line from the Zohar is a reference to the second blessing preceding the Shema from Ahavah Rabbah, where he says, Le'ahava u'yira, right? And that we should, and look at the words that precede it, and enlighten our eyes in your Torah, i.e. doing some study, v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha, and cleave to our hearts with your mitzvot, and then unify, ve'yached levavenu. So one of the cool things here is we have this word ve'yached, unify, and then we're going to go forward and say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, right? So we're going to unify our hearts by saying Shema. And then in this text, in the prayer, it says, how do we vayached our levavenu? How do we unify our hearts? Le'ahava u'yira, that we need to practice love and fear, or love and awe would be another translation of yira. And so love and awe are these kind of binary principles in opposition. And they have a lot of they're very loaded in Judaism. But the simple understanding of them, as we often come across them, is how we relate to God, right? And we either relate to God with one or both of these ideas, right? We find lots of ways in which we love God. I'm a big lover of God, right? I go out into my backyard and I see a flowering tree, and I'm overwhelmed by love for the Creator for making such a beautiful thing for me, right? I hug my kids at night and I feel this sense of love, right? I feel intimate and emotional with the people who I love, my friends and my family and my life, and I owe that to God, and I understand God through love, right? Yira is a little bit different, right? When a person is sick or afraid, they reach out to God, right? There are no atheists in foxholes. And another principle of awe is to be in a kind of a sense of the mortal state, of understanding that God holds all our fate in God's hands, and it's up to us to kind of please the Lord however we do, hopefully in order that everything comes out for the good. That's a kind of an old school theology, but there's no way of getting around the fact that we all pray to God, or many of us pray to God, kind of hoping that we will be saved, we will be healthy, we will be successful, we will be good. And all of that kind of descends from Yira, which comes out of this, we also mention in this prayer in the Ahavah Rabbah. So there are two places in the Zohar where it uses this, at least 2 places, where it uses this phrase. And one is a direct reference and one is an indirect reference that I thought was so good that I had to share it with you. So first of all, the Zohar is written in Aramaic, which was possibly the lingua franca of Shimon Bar Yochai, and possibly the second or third language of Moses de Leon. Modern scholars think that the Zohar was not entirely written, if at all, by Shimon Bar Yochai, because the Zohar uses words that Shimon Bar Yochai certainly could not have known in 2nd century, 3rd century Israel, because it's Aramaic words that didn't exist yet. It's like if George Washington was talking about driving his Ford Mustang onto the battlefield. Did not happen, could not happen, right? So, but that doesn't mean that Shimon Bar Yochai didn't write some of it. So academics have been arguing about that for almost 100 years now. So the Zohar says this: the Chachma ubina ina nistarot bemocha ubeliba, berachima udechila, veoraita bala dechila urachima lo parche leila. So lo la parche leila and rachima deila, dechila are phrases that we see in our text. So, but interestingly enough, the Baal Shem Tov doesn't get the quote exactly right. In a full search of the entire corpus of Jewish literature and Sepharia, there is no text in the Zohar which exactly matches what the Baal Shem Tov said. So there's my nerdy scholarly moment for the day. I could be wrong, but that's what I found. So the text translates as this: wisdom and understanding, they are sequestered in the brain and in the heart, in love and in fear. And Torah without fear and love do not flourish above. And that's the closest we get to what he says, except he says it, the Baal Shem Tov says the word Torah, and the Zohar says oraita, right? Oraita is the Aramaic word for Torah. So it's pretty close. So anyways, Torah without fear and love do not flourish above. So this is this concept of study in the study hall needs to include both rachima and dechila. It needs to include love and fear. All right, so go back to the beginning of that line and it says, wisdom and understanding are sequestered in the brain and in the heart. What the heck is going on here? I'll show you what's going on here. It's super weird. So this is on your printout, but it's pretty cool. On your right, you'll see the sephirotic tree. Okay, so the Zohar lists that God is one, but God's qualities, which are human in nature also, are 10. And they are organized in kind of a tree that also mirrors the human body. At the top is the head. There is a left and a right. There are arms and legs and a trunk and even sexual reproductive organs all the way down to the base of the feet. And that is this tree which you see on your right, called the structure of the sefirot. At the top is Keter, which is the highest of highs. This is, by the way, what was referred to in mystical literature and academic literature as the Godhead. Another way of saying that is this is how God works, what God looks like up above, right? So the basic principle behind Kabbalah is, one of the basic principles in Judaism is, can we know what God is truly like? And there are 2 answers. No, God is unknowable. God is an all-powerful, immortal, eternal, infinite being. And of course, human beings can't possibly conceive of it. And the opposite answer is, yes, we can know what God is like, because God gives us clues all throughout Torah. We were created in the image of God, and therefore we know what God is like because we are like God. And so here we get it. Keter, meaning crown, is the head or the top of God. And even for the Kabbalists, they would say Keter is virtually or completely inaccessible. And then on down to the bottom, Malchut is also known as Shekhinah. That is the divine emanation in our world. This is the God that we know very well, the immanent God. But if you look, we have these 2 phrases, these 2 words used in our text. The chokhmah ubina ina nistarot, wisdom and understanding, are sequestered, right? What are wisdom and understanding? What are chokhmah and bina? Chokhmah and bina are 2 of the higher levels of understanding, intellectual understanding that God either is capable of or that we are given by God. So Chokhmah on the right and Bina on the left. I translated them as wisdom and understanding. One is kind of the knowledge that you gain from book learning, and the other would be the knowledge that you gain from personal experience. That's understanding, right? I can read 1,000 cookbooks, but still be lousy at making souffles, right? The 1,000 cookbooks is chokhmah, right? The baking a successful souffle that doesn't fall down, that's bina, that's understanding. So, and then he kind of lays it out that the brain is chokhmah, and I put it down as on the right. You can argue about this. And the heart is on the left, that understanding is a thing that you gain with your heart, right? You can intellectually know how to make a souffle like better than anybody, but until you put your heart and soul into baking that souffle, you don't know jack squat about cooking, okay? So that's my metaphor for today. And he says, Torah without fear and love do not flourish above. But he starts off by mentioning it as Chokhmah and Bina. So clearly there's a binary here going on where he's laying out two things, and then he's relating them to fear and love. By the way, another interesting thing that he does in this text is he inverts them from one line to the next. So at first he says that it's berachima udechila, and then he says be'oraita below dechila urachima. He flips them. That love and fear and love have sort of a inverse, reversible relationship. Interesting. All right, so there's another Zohar that I brought. This is straight out of this text. If you know your Hebrew and Aramaic at all, you can see that the text on the right that you see on your screen is in Aramaic. You can probably read it and understand it, some of it. I actually pretty much could read and understand all of this. By the way, the reason that I often pick up the Zohar and I'm totally mystified, I have no idea what's going on, is because my Aramaic is not very good. And often I'll pick it up and I'll be like, I have no idea what's going on here. But this I could actually understand. And of course, my version of the Zohar has a Hebrew translation on the left side. So that's what you're looking at here on your screen. The Hebrew is on the left. And it's actually pretty simple. This one is fairly straightforward once you kind of accept that it's already fairly beyond us because it's Kabbalah. So the verse in Tikkunei Zohar is starting by asking a question about Zachor v'Shamor. So for those of you who light 2 candles on Shabbat, the reason we light 2 candles, and Rana's singing this, I see, Shamor v'Zachor v'Dibor Echad, it's a thing we sing during Kabbalat Shabbat, right? And the reason we light 2 candles is because the 10 Commandments tells us to keep the Sabbath twice, once in Exodus and once in Deuteronomy. But one time it says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And the second time it says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho, right? Guard the Sabbath and keep it holy. So De Leon is going to riff off of this, right? He's going to go a little crazy. And he says, remember and guard. These are juxtaposed with the tefillin of the head and the tefillin of the arm, right? So we guard the Sabbath and we guard the commandments and we observe the Torah by putting on tefillin, which include inside of them the Shema and the Ve'ahavta. And we wear one on our head and one on our arm, and they have the exact same verses. Why are we doing that? One is Shamor and one is Zachor, okay? Another thing that's going on here is one is, and he does this very slyly, the Risha is Yud, and the Yada is Hay, right? The tefillin on your head are the Yud, and the tefillin on your arm are the Hay, okay? There's 2 things going on there at least. Yud, Hay, Vav, Hay are the 4 letters in God's name. And the Yud, if you drew a picture, I'll draw a quick picture. Oh, where's my drawing board? Here it is. I love this. This is crazy and weird, but it's super fun, okay? If you were to draw Yud, Hay, Vav, Hay vertically, it would look like this. The Yud would be here. The Hay would be here. The Vav would be here. And the second Hay would be here, okay? Does that look like a stick figure guy? It looks like a stick figure guy, right? The Yud is the head, tefillin. The Hay is the arms. The Hay goes on your arm, right? The The tefillin of your arm are the hay. So that's a pretty crazy little funky thing that Kabbalah created 1,000 years ago. This realization that the Yud Hay Vav Hay could look like a human being. And so he does that, right? So he's got a bunch of weird, funky binaries, right? He's created that Chokhmah and Bina are left and right, that brain and heart are left and right, that Shamor and Zachor are left and right, that tefillin of the Yad and tefillin Shel Rosh are either left or right or binary, 1 and 2. And then he's got Hay and Yud as binaries that are next to each other. He's going to keep going, right? It doesn't stop. There's no end to the crazy binaries that go on here. And righteous, and he adds, he just throws these two words in and keeps moving. Dachar v'nekuva, and masculine and feminine, right? Male and female. And that's also a reference to this concept that in the Zohar, there's a belief that God created one human being, and then that was both Zachar and Nekeva, that was male and female, that had a male face on one side and a female face on the other. And only later on in the text does God split this singular human into two. That's the understanding of the creation story in Genesis 1 versus the creation story in Genesis 2. Okay, so we've got another binary, male and female. Then we get Shema berechima u rechima, Techila u rechima. V'zaka ita man de michu lun b'kriyat Shema b'dechila u rechima. And righteous are the ones that unite them both in the recitation of Shema with both fear and love. So this is kind of to Dan's point about going into tefillah and doing it from rote with no kind of like fixed idea about what's going to happen. The Kabbalistic idea of what you should be doing when you do Shema is that you should be taking all of the aspects of understanding God through fear, all the aspects of understanding God through love, and unifying them. And how do you do it? You unify it by having your arm tefillin and your head tefillin on. You unify it by saying this phrase, right? By saying this line in Ahavah Rabbah, Ve'yached levavenu le'ahava u'yira. And then you take all that crazy intent, all that focus, all that kind of, forethought, and you go in and say Shema, right? So what are you thinking about when you say Shema? You should be thinking about unifying the divine aspects above of fear and love, right? It's a lot. It's a crazy amount. But the idea that you just kind of mumble the Shema while you're waiting for the coffee to hit, like I do most mornings, is not good enough. For the Kabbalah, for the Zohar, they're saying to kind of fully understand and transcend prayer, you've got to bring down this Shema really well. And so I'm going all the way back. That's what the Baal Shem Tov is referencing when he talks about, when he brings in this concept of pircha la'ila, that it should flourish above, right? That for your prayer to go up, for your study to go up, you've got to really focus. And how do you really focus? You bring in love and you bring in fear, right? You've got to have kind of all that brain power running at 1,000 miles an hour as you go in. All right, let's finish the line because it gets slightly weirder. Right, you're like, Rabbi, it's weird enough. I don't need more weird. But no, wait, there's more. You get the Ginsu knives too, right? Like it just keeps getting weirder. So he then says that at times when Israel busied themselves with written Torah and oral Torah, again, another set of binaries, and he's bringing in more studies. This is actually all the way back to what the Baal Shem Tov was talking about, the house of study where they're learning written Torah and oral Torah all day long. At times when Israel busies themselves with written Torah and oral Torah with love and fear, it is said of them, do not take the mother bird with its young. Okay, so now we're getting weirder. So this is a quote from the Torah in Deuteronomy 22:6. And it's a quote that I have seen in both Hasidic and mystical circles before. It's one weird mitzvah. It's the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird. It's one of the 613 commandments. And it's often mentioned in the Talmud and the Zohar because it's a very interesting mitzvah. One, it's weird, right? you're shooing away a mother bird in order to collect the eggs. So either that's just because it's what it says, or because it's an aspect of chesed, that you are sending away a mother before you kill its young, essentially, and that you're not practicing extreme cruelty. You don't take the dove for your lunch and take the eggs for your lunch. You send away some of them. But there's an interesting aspect to this. There's at least two interesting aspects to this mitzvah, which is why it probably gets brought in here. One is the rest of Deuteronomy 22:7 says, and if you do this mitzvah, you will have long life. And it's one of only two places in the entire Torah where there is a specific reward for the mitzvah. And usually our rabbis believe long life not in this world, but in the next world, meaning there's some sort of metaphysical act that transpires when you shoo away mother bird. But if you take it and you make it metaphorical, like here, then you can make all mitzvot have eternal reward. And then he continues and says, and at times when they are not busying themselves with Torah and love and fear, it is said of them, send, yea, verily send away the mother. So shalach tishlach et ha'em. So if you don't do it, it's sending away, right? But if you do it, it has some sort of neat other mystical aspect which brings you eternal reward. So I have one other thought on why he brings this in, because he kind of gets, the Zohar gets pretty weird here. And my thought was this. Where is it? It's down here. The commandment of do not take a mother bird with her young is weird because it's another binary commandment. It's one of the rare commandments I can think where you have to do two acts in order to accomplish the act at all. And the two acts that you have to do are, you have to shoo away the mother bird and you have to take the eggs, right? Doing one and not the other is not sufficient to achieving the commandment. And so this is another example of the things that the Zohar was already talking about, where you have to do two things, fear and love, in order to unify things. You have to do both in order to create unification. And so this is one of those mitzvot. So I'm going to run down the rest of the list and then open it up to crazy questions, because we've got this long list of weird binary commands that when you bring them together, you unify. So we've got Bina and Chochmah, we've got heart and brain, we've got Shamor v'Zachor, we've got the tefillin of the Yad and the tefillin of the head. We've got the Hay and the Yud. We've got the masculine and the feminine. We've got this concept of Dechila and Rachima, or Ahavah and Yirah, love and fear. And then also we've mentioned the oral Torah and the written Torah, which I put down as left and right. And then finally, we've got the idea that you've got to unify it in order to come to prayer at the highest spiritual level. And that it should, going all the way back to what the Baal Shem Tov was talking about at the beginning, to unify it is to bring it up, right? This is the Torah of elevation. How do you get your Torah to go higher and higher, to ascend spiritually? You bring in fear, you bring in love, you unify them, and it goes up, right? It's this crazy metaphysic of how you focus in order to come to a greater place of deeper understanding of God and what God wants of us. And the unification is what brings you down to the middle. So the unification of fear and love puts you down this middle lane, if you see on the screen, of the Godhead, right? Only when you unify Chochmah and Bina, Chesed and Gevura, Hod and Netzach, do you come to Yesod, Tiferet, Dat, and Keter, the middle of the lane, right? You go up the sefirotic tree by unifying the left side and the right side. The more you can create balance and symbiosis in the universe through thought of both love and fear, through understanding and wisdom, right? Read the cookbook and bake the souffle, through putting on your head tefillin and your heart tefillin. Only through doing that, and by studying both written Torah and oral Torah, only through unification do you come to a greater spiritual understanding, and only then does your prayer and your study truly ascend, right? that is the full-blown teaching for today. It's a lot, right? He brought in a lot of ideas. And I think one of the crazy things, just to conclude the thought, is that before we open up to questions, is that the Baal Shem Tov was doing something really simple in one sentence. And what the Baal Shem Tov did happened in a story where he walks into a Beit Midrash and says, nope, can't walk in, won't go up. And his Hasidim look at him and like, why? And basically he says, there's this line in the Zohar that says this room is not suitable for unifying fear and love and bringing up God's name. And so we're not going to do it. And they'll go, okay. And they walk out, right? But underlying it was a lot of deep and fairly complicated stuff that it took me, I'm not kidding, 5 hours of study in order to unpack, right? I was sitting here trying to get my kids to do their learning for school. My kids were also trying to like color a Haggadah. My son was learning about Bidikat Hametz. It was great. It was like this very intergenerational Beit Midrash. At some point, my son is complaining that he does not want to read and translate the text about Bidikat Hametz, which is literally 2 sentences. And I was like, hey, if you would like, I'll flip open the Zohar and you can translate this for me. And he goes, okay. And then I'm like, yeah, go give it a try. And he starts to read it. He gets one word and he goes, I'm going to go back to my work. And I'm like, great. So that all being said, like there's this, it takes a lot of work to unpack it. And I think when we talk about the Baal Shem Tov bringing Hasidut out to the people, it was a great act because the Zohar is nearly incomprehensible. Whereas the Baal Shem Tov, what he was doing was far more comprehensible. And I probably overcomplicated all of it. But that's really what I love to do. All right, so wave your hands if you have a question. I see Marilyn has one for sure, and then Phil has one next. Go ahead.
Obviously, Marilyn has a question. You know, I could buy into this whole thing, except for one thing. And so I have actually a question for you. And it's because of, I have to go back to being a linguist here, okay, and talk about language and words. And that is when I see the word fear, I see something that closes us off and narrows us. And so for me, fear and love cannot coexist. But when I hear the word awe, I hear a word that opens us up, that expands us to something larger and more than, as opposed to something narrower and smaller. And so I totally understand if we're saying that you have to merge love and awe, opening us up to something larger that we may never understand, but knowing that there's a potentiality there for what you call this merging into the middle to make it something successful and stronger to bring things together. And so when people use the word fear, they immediately shut me off and send me away. But the minute you use the word awe, what happened to me is what I say would happen when I approach, or when we approach it. It happens when I do learning and I suddenly realize, everything opens up for me. And it happens when I'm in shul sometimes and suddenly everything opens up, and it doesn't open up because of fear. It opens up because of awe, which yes, it can be tinged with fear because you're dealing with something larger than yourself, but it is not something that rejects you, that narrows you. It's something that enlarges. And so for me, I can buy this whole thing, but not as long as we keep using the word fear.
Yeah, I love that, and I have often had a hard time with yira, the concept, the religious concept. It's hard for me to fear God, but I did kind of throw out the mortality aspect that makes it a little bit make more sense for me. You're right that the Hebrew word doesn't have one good translation. But the best, I like metaphor. I can only work in practical metaphor for my brain. I remember standing at the Grand Canyon, and the Grand Canyon is a good example of that, in the sense that you stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon and you are in awe of how massive it is. You are also afraid of falling off a cliff, right? And so you experience both. And the understanding, I think, ideally for the more developed spiritual individual is that you suffuse the two. I'm not so sure I am capable of it because I generally am with you, Marilyn. I generally don't fear God. I generally don't fear anything.
I
really.
do just a little bit fear God, but for probably very different reasons than most people would think. Whole long story, not going there. But I think that I agree with you. But you notice how you've minimized fear also by making it just that little bit of being afraid to fall, but nevertheless recognizing the larger possibility, the opening. And so I don't see them as an interchangeable word. I see them as two completely different concepts, and that's why it bothers me.
It's a thing to work on. All right.
It's a thing to work on.
Yeah. So Phil, you were next, and then I think I saw a couple other hands, Rana and Audrey, and maybe Joe, or maybe not. Joe does
How's
one.
my audio? Can you hear me?
Sharon speaking.
I'm ready.
HCC and
Bye, Sharon. Thank you.
So thank you so
Okay, and other Joe wants to go. Go ahead, Phil.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
So a comment and a question, but my comment was very similar to what Marilyn was saying, is that I appreciated when the word awe started being used. In general, in my prayer and studies, I also have trouble with the God-fearing thing that really, we started, and I guess the Christians took it, and it's like a very common idea. God-fearing individual is a good person. So yeah, I always struggle with God-fearing. It's kind of like if Judaism wants me to come in and wants me to love God and serve God, it's really tough for me to also desire fearing God. But I love the idea of treating life with a sense of awe. So that it just speaks to me a lot more. I really like the idea, like the vengeful, wrathful God is always something I struggle with more. And I guess the idea is like, you're supposed to actually fear that if you don't daven well or don't do the mitzvot, he could turn on you. But like, I don't like that part. So I definitely like the awe part more. It works for me better. I think it works for Marilyn and probably you too, Rabbi. But the question I wanted to ask you that you could help us out with is, I'm having trouble connecting the Torah verse to the rest of what we're talking about. The actual, the line of what Aaron should be doing. I'm sorry, what was it? It was, let's see. About the burning, keeping the light burning, I'm having trouble linking that text to the Baal Shem Tov and the Zohar.
Yeah, I mean, the Baal Shem Tov is basically saying, he's just riffing on the word olah, pretty much, and what the word go up means, right? And what it is to go up. And he basically is saying, Zot Torah ha'olah. This is the Torah of going up. Like, how do things go up? They can't get stuck. Torah cannot be trapped in a space. And so the weird piece for that is that he then makes a homiletical pivot where he basically says, here's how your prayers go up. And it has nothing to do with the story about the Beit Midrash and how full it is. He basically, it seems like he's using this as an example and an opportunity to teach a moment about how prayer can elevate, which is you have fear and you have awe and you unify it. That's the place, I think, though, where there's not a lot of immediate connection. It's basically the Baal Shem Tov saying, listen, I understand how Kabbalah works. I've been praying to God a lot and I study a lot of Torah. Let me give you a piece of advice, kid. Right? That's my only thing. But there's no real direct connection between Shema, and as far as I can tell, Shema, Olah, Yirah, and Ahavah. They're not quite. The only link between them is the Baal Shem Tov says do it this way, and the dude had a lot of followers who listened to him. That's my understanding. All right, let's see. I know Audrey wanted to say something, and Joe wanted to say something, and Rana wants to say something.
So my father used to say that his mother, who had 10 children, raised them with a firm hand with love and fear. I think that we just don't have the right word for it in English, because that fear was not, it was the same kind of fear as we're meaning here, but obviously they weren't deathly afraid of their mother. They just feared consequences or whatever she made them fear. It was almost awe, but it was neither awe nor fear.
Yeah, and I think you said it really well. Using the parallel of fathers is a very good one, because I think God is often cast as a 1950s father, right? In Christian America, in the sense that, you know, the kids came home with the slippers and the pipe and the martini glass, but also if the kids got a D in school or put a rock through the neighbor's window, they were going to get the belt, you know? And we have moved way past that. You know, I sometimes look at my kids like, man, I would really like to give you a spanking, but we don't really do that. You know, it's been 3 generations since anybody really got spankings in my family. And so my kids don't fear me. You know, they're constantly saying things and I'm like, you really shouldn't say that. But there's, you know, the only punishment in the modern world is go to your room. So fear doesn't have the same connotation. And so my generation doesn't typically, you know, Phil and me are kind of both coming from the same thing, which is fearing God is a difficult concept. And one reason I think that might be is we don't generally jive with the notion that we should live in a society where we fear the people that we love. We should love the people that we love, and we should have awe for things, but we shouldn't fear. So yeah, and I think that goes to Marilyn's point also. But Audrey, you brought it down really nicely. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi. You are now up there with my wife. You've made me feel like a baby who has made the leap from Ma to Mama for the first time. I had a lot of fun listening to you. I'm not ready to make to connect these theological dots yet. I need another day or two, and I mean that in a metaphorical way. Who knows how long it would take. Where I am today, if anybody is interested in how I can connect the dots, at the level I can connect the dots, just take a look at the chat box, and you can see how I connected the dots with the Baal Shem Tov. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it. Great. Oh, go ahead, Ron. You got the last word, and then I'll turn off the video so that we can all talk about Dee's recipes for what was it? Kasha varnishkas was what you were opening with before we.
Yeah, I was telling a story about kasha varnishkas, and
okay.
I heard Dee's is the best, but my mother's was mighty good. At any rate, somewhere in my Jewish education, in high school level Jewish education, not day school, but what was SAGIS, used to be College of Jewish Studies, I learned that I was taught that the word fear meant respect. So from that moment on, I've never thought of fear as fear, but respect. So I didn't have any trouble with respect and awe.
I think that's really well said. And I think that a full understanding I think another way to understand this other than the word fear and related to the word respect would be a full contemplation and understanding of that God has wonderful good aspects like flowering trees and beautiful bushes and hugs from my daughter, and also has really crappy things like, you know, backed up sewer lines and coronaviruses. You know, like there are aspects to the world that we have to stand in awe of, even if we don't like them. You know, that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are parts to life that are difficult, and that comes with a full understanding of the divine and what God brings down into the universe. And then there are the aspects which are not manifest in our world, that God is all attributes in all aspects at all time. And so even those things which don't have physical manifestations, not, you know, backed up sewer lines and so on, but like that the divine operates in a way in which we can't fully understand, that is beyond, that is both awesome and all loving, right? That the universe has wheels within wheels and gears spinning that are not available to us. Okay, that's where we're going to leave off for the day. I appreciate you guys joining in. I'm sorry if I went a little over, but that happens.
What else
And if you'd like to hang out and swap kasha recipes with D. I'll keep the chat open for about 10 or 15 minutes. Jeremy told me to close it, but Jeremy doesn't. I don't work for Jeremy. Jeremy works for me.
We'll remember.
Jeremy doesn't know what you do.
Don't tell him I said that.
It's a secret.
It has nothing to do with fear or awe.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. I'll see you next week.
Have a good day.